welcome to RPG Heroes, a podcast where every other week I speak to a true hero in the realm of role-playing games about their journey, their craft, and their views. As your host, I will focus on one particular aspect of this wonderful hobby for the interview, regale you with stories from my own 25 years of experience with role-playing games, and reflect on the major takeaways from the interview. Join me now on this epic journey and awaken the hero in you. Welcome to episode 12 of RPG Heroes. In this episode, we will delve into our main topic, science, fantasy, and a career in RPGs with the help of the amazing Amanda Hamon, co-creator of the Starfinder RPG and managing developer at Paizo. In today's show, we will delve into science fantasy as a genre and as a game type, how to play, and what sort of tips and advice Amanda has for us to make the most of such a game. We go into the crunchiness of the game that she co-created, which is Starfinder, and very interestingly, we have a whole discussion about how to actually build up a career in RPGs, which could be interesting for some of you. Before we get into all that, though, a little bit of news about the podcast. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I have closed my Instagram account because I wasn't really doing much with it, and to be honest, I don't have the time to figure out how it works. So, if you were following me on Instagram, please move over to either Twitter or Facebook or both. Next is that I am very much encouraged by the fact that after I spoke out in support of Black Lives Matter, I did not lose any followers on Twitter. Actually, I gained a bunch. And I think that is a sign that you, yes you, my listeners, are nice people. Also, there's a new segment or a new section of this podcast called Bonus XP. And this is specifically for bonus episodes with, for instance, extra interviews, RPG reviews, which I'm hoping to do at some point, and collaborations with other podcasters. And the first Bonus XP episode has actually gone live last week. It's a collaboration with the cast of Omegaville, which is a cyberpunk actual play podcast. And if there's anything you would like me to review or talk about on Bonus XP, then just send me a message on Twitter. That's the easiest way to reach me these days. Now, I've also noticed there's quite a lot of new listeners. Downloads are going up quite fast, which is good news for me. I'm very happy to see that. And if you happen to be a new listener since episode 10 or 11, and maybe you found me through the Facebook adverts that I placed, well, then give me a shout out on Facebook or Twitter. Let me know how you got to find the podcast, and well, if it's everything you hoped for. Now on to our main topic. So, science fantasy then. As the name suggests, it is a mix of sci-fi or science fiction and fantasy. In other words, we get robots and lasers, but we also get magic and orcs and all those kind of things. The best of both worlds, really, when you think about it. Now, like for a lot of people, for me, my introduction to role-playing games was Dungeons & Dragons, a fantasy role-playing game. And fantasy was also the type of literature that I would read most at the time. So I read, of course, Lord of the Rings and all these things that rhymed. And so a lot of my imagination was filled with classical fantasy imagery. And so the first time that I swapped over to a science fantasy game, I had to choose something that my imagination was ready to deal with. And at the time, that was Star Wars. It was a D20-based game for Star Wars. I'll link to it in the show notes. And because it was Star Wars, I was familiar with the universe. I was familiar with the technology level and the kind of stuff that could happen in that particular world. And of course the movies give you lots and lots of inspiration for types of characters, types of adventures, etc. And I have to say I was extremely lucky that we had a game master for this game who is by far the most knowledgeable person that I personally know about Star Wars. And he's actually one of my Patreon supporters at the moment. So hey Bert, here's a shout out to you. You really ran an amazing Star Wars game for us. And so this was the first time that I got to experience a role-playing game in a science fantasy universe. So I got to be a Wookiee, which of course was amazing. And on top of that, we had grenades and laser guns and also a Jedi who could do, well, I guess a type of magic. And all that combined made for a wonderful, let's say a wonderfully chaotic bunch of games. And what I like about science fantasy is you get all the cool gear and interesting tech from science fiction, and you get to be in space, which is just really cool. But on top of that, you get kind of the mystical, mysterious stuff that you get in fantasy sometimes when magic comes knocking on your door. And I have to say, I really enjoyed that combination. The next experience I had with science fantasy was Shadowrun, which is, well, some people call it cyberpunk with elves. So it takes place on our planet Earth and in a not too far future with lots of interesting technology. But the world has awoken, and now there's magic, and there's orcs, and there's elves, etc. And again, a very interesting setting. I sadly never got to actually play or run this game. I bought the book, I read it, I thought, wow, that's really cool. I also got really confused by some of the rules, and that's probably partly my fault and partly the fact that the rules are very, very crunchy in some areas. For instance, the rules for initiative, they are very detailed. And if you love that, well, then check it out. And I hear that the new rules for Shadowrun are, of course, much improved since the one that I read. And then, years and years and years later, I was playing some D&D with some new friends that I made here in this city, in Nijmegen. And one of the guys, Mike, he pointed out to me, hey, did you know that there's going to be this new game called Starfinder? And I thought, wow, cool, another science fantasy game that starts with an S. No, I kid. But I thought, okay, Starfinder, what is that? And he said, well, it's fantasy. It's based on loosely on Pathfinder, but it's in space, and we have aliens and laser guns, etc. And when I looked it up and I saw the artwork and I saw the way that that they were advertising it at the time, I got so excited I decided, yes, let's go for this. This is finally another chance for me to dive into science fantasy. And so I have, and I've been playing and running this game for quite a while now, and it's super enjoyable. And again, so if you like the Paizo family of games, Pathfinder and now Starfinder, you'll know that they're relatively crunchy, quite a lot of rules for all kinds of specific things, which in a way it helps because science fantasy has this sci-fi aspect, which means you have to deal with modern science in a sort of way. So you need to deal with things like faster than light travel, machines, computers, internet, all these kind of things. And it's handy to have rules handy for those kind of things to help you with all that. And of course, to have rules for all the really strange, outlandish things that happen in that game. So that it's been a good experience overall. But what I find is, because my roots lie very, very clearly in fantasy, in traditional fantasy, I find it more difficult to actually come up with really good adventures for science fantasy. And luckily, Amanda, our RPG hero of the day, has some really good advice for that later on. Another wonderful role-playing game that we've talked about before on this show, Index Card RPG, or ICRPG, has its own science fiction setting called Warp Shell, in which you can easily play either science fiction or science fantasy, whatever you like. And some other famous games in this genre would include Warhammer 40k, Rifts, and Gamma World. So, now let's hear from the expert. Welcome to the show, Amanda Hamon. Amanda is the co-creator of the Starfinder RPG and works for Paizo as managing developer. Her determination to make her dream of an RPG career come true is an inspiration. Like many of us, she started role-playing games in high school. After attending Gen Con, she was impressed by how easy it was for attendees to chat with the authors and designers of the games she enjoyed playing. So she decided she wanted to become an editor in this industry. During her career as a journalist, she started working very hard on that goal, writing articles, adventures, and contributing to source books. And here she is now, freelance RPG writer, winner of any awards, co-creator of a huge RPG, managing developer at a huge RPG company, and now an RPG hero at my not-so-huge podcast. Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on the show.
Yeah, not a problem, and thank you so much for being here. Yeah, let's start off with the obvious. Starfinder. Yeah, for those of the people that are listening that have no clue what it is, what's would you say is the blurb for Starfinder? What is it?
Sure. So Starfinder is science fantasy in space. Some folks have abbreviated it to Pathfinder in Space, which
Hmm.
is somewhat accurate, but not entirely. It is a D20 based system that's very similar to 3.5 D&D. It's based on that same chassis, but there are various subsystems and rules mechanisms that are intended specifically for science fantasy. And so it is a game that is geared specifically toward gear, which is very important in all sci-fi and science fantasy games. It also includes magic, but not to such a great extent as a traditional Vancian ninth level casting system would.
Yeah.
And it's about exploring the universe in a party in your starship, having great soap opera based adventures. That's kind of the general elevator pitch for Starfinder.
Excellent, yeah. And what would you say sets Starfinder apart from all the hundreds of RPGs out there? What makes it unique and special to you?
So I get this question a lot, and I've thought about it a lot because there are a lot of other sci-fi, space-based, far-future games out there, and
Hmm.
I think that one of the biggest exceptions is the fact that Starfinder is in its own unique campaign setting. It's a version of the Pathfinder campaign setting, and so there are definitely homages and some things carried forward, but for the most part, the campaign setting is entirely unique. It's not based on another property. It's not Star Trek or Star Wars or 40K or any of that other stuff.
Yeah.
So there are characters that are recognizable, especially within the divine pantheon of the deities, to people who are fans of Pathfinder, but there's a whole bunch of brand new stuff for the game. And so we have really focused on making Starfinder a very sort of fun, but diverse in the sense of lots and lots of different aliens to give that cantina feel for when you're adventuring around and you are encountering all kinds of weird, fascinating, fantastic creatures and learning about them and having that be part of the fun of discovering the world, not just what different planets are, but who lives there, what their culture is like, and what are the stories that are being told, in the microcosm and in the macrocosm of the entire galaxy.
Yeah, that I think that's part of what I really like about the skills that you've chosen for this game. That one of them is culture, um,
Yes.
and yeah, that sounds so much better than knowledge local.
No, it's local. Yeah, yeah. We really thought about, how we were going to pull
Mm,
back and make a much grander scale, both within the rule set, but also within the campaign setting.
yeah.
Because, for example, it's very much up to the GM's discretion, but culture can mean lots and lots of different things depending on where you are. If you
Yeah.
are a cultural scholar from Castrovel and you've studied everything about the Dragonkin and the Riforians, the furry space elves, and how that society works, but you are on a different planet in another system, your plus 15 culture bonus isn't going to mean nearly as much unless you have specified that you've studied the thing that you're trying to do. So
Yeah.
it's kind of an interesting expression of GMs thinking outside the box when those type of things come up.
Yeah, yeah, because I've always found knowledge local to be tricky as a games master. It's local knowledge, but you're not local here, so what do you know? And
Exactly,
some players
exactly.
get really upset if you say, "Well, you're not local, so you know nothing."
Yeah.
They really don't like it. Yeah. Um, so Starfinder was the first non-fantasy game that Paizo brought out, right?
It's still technically fantasy because we do have
Uh-huh.
magic, and there
Yeah.
are magic items. It's just we explain it such that if in a traditional high fantasy world, fantasy is all the way up here at a 10, and
Yeah.
maybe technology is at a 0 or even a negative level,
Mhm.
if you're not allowing guns or other steampunk level types of technology. And with Starfinder, it's very much an even keel of
Mm.
technology and fantasy magic, so to speak, being pretty equal. And so you could specialize in one or the other, but they're both very present in equal amounts within the world.
Yeah. And what have been some of the unique challenges and maybe also opportunities when you, as a company, had to kind of switch gears and go from high fantasy to um, science fantasy in space?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question because I experienced that both as a member of the core design team, and as a freelancer writing on it, but also you just kind of personally, like switching my own mindset from high fantasy, traditional Pathfinder and D&D to science fantasy, and kind of thinking about what inspired me from various different properties.
Mm.
I had spent, by the time we started working on Starfinder, I had spent maybe the better part of a decade basically only writing high fantasy material. And so I had written lots of adventures and lots of source material, and was very sort of plugged into, what's anachronistic, what's something that doesn't exist in the world, or what's something that does exist but is realistic for the low level of technology in this kind of medieval backdrop of a setting,
Yeah.
all the way to Starfinder, which is, wow, what is possible with magic and with technology. And what I had to do, and this was early on in the development of Starfinder, I wrote all of the new unique spells for Starfinder, for the Technomancer and for the Mystic, which at the time were only 2 casting classes.
Mm.
We've since got another one, but
Yeah.
that was the assignment then. And what I had to do is I actually sat down and I spent, I think, an hour just writing down ideas of what were cool things that I would like to see you be able to do in a setting inspired by my favorite science fantasy properties, like Mass Effect and Dead Space and Star Wars, and just all sorts of Guardians of the Galaxy, the things that I personally thought were cool. I
Yeah.
had to like take that time to rewire my brain, and once I did, the ideas just came from everywhere. But for a while, it was difficult, it was hard, so it was just like a conscious sort of reworking of my mindset, and it took time to get there and to have that be my base level.
Yeah. Yeah. I can imagine that. I found starting to run Starfinder myself, coming from D&D 3.5, so it was the right chassis for me. But I find it more difficult to come up with things quickly. So adventures, especially for my players. So I have like a broad outline of the campaign and the story and things that are going on, and they are really pestering the Aslanti Star Empire, which is great. They're a wonderful, wonderful enemy to have.
They are
Uh,
bad guys.
they really are, yeah. But yeah, I found switching gears like you did quite difficult. So what would you say is good advice for people trying to write a Starfinder adventure? What should you do differently from writing let's say a D&D or Pathfinder adventure?
Ooh, I would say keep in mind that the general constraints of a normal D&D or Pathfinder campaign either don't exist or are so different that you need to rethink them. So,
Hmm.
for example, communication can be instantaneous. It's the same problem that you see with movies. There's an entire plot, and you think this could all have been avoided if somebody called somebody else.
Yeah, yeah,
So you need to think about, with maybe withholding information or presenting information in an unclear way, or having some sort of conceit as to why the instantaneous communication doesn't necessarily work as
yeah,
planned. That's a big consideration. Another big consideration is travel. It's very much a narrative device, so you are free in Starfinder, for example, to have things existing on different planets that the PCs have to go find or investigate or collect. That travel can be fairly quickly. The rules, are a little more nuanced as far as how long it might take or how you might reach a certain place that is in, in the drift or in the vast, which has got rules about how you reach them, and it does
yeah,
take more time. But yeah, so you really have to think about the fact that the limitations that are traditional to RPGs, specifically maybe with like gear or reaching lots of different types of resources, those kind of things don't really exist. So you've got to kind of keep in mind the fact that the PCs might circumvent your plot very quickly, very
yeah.
easily without your knowledge.
Yeah, exactly. Then we're like, oh, but wait, I have this device. Click. Okay.
Yes, the internet is a thing. We call it the
Yeah.
infosphere. A lot of players just call it space Google, but it is kind of the same thing. So you have to like really try to anticipate as much as you can what you're going to say when the players go, well, I'm just going to Google this. Like, what
Yeah.
information are they going to find, and why is maybe it harder to dig up information
Mhm.
on a specific topic than it might be in their heads.
Yeah. 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 One thing that I've been doing is making sure that, well, telling my players that this infosphere exists on a planet. When they're not on the planet, well, there is no internet. I mean, how could there be? And once you land on a planet, well, okay, let's see if you get access. What's my
Yeah.
Wi-Fi password? Yeah.
Yeah, you can certainly restrict it in that way. You
Mm,
can limit it to whatever the starship is able to connect to at the time. You can say, oh, of course your connection is spotty because you're in a drift and there are pieces of other planes being pulled in next to you and that's creating interference. Like there's all sorts of
yeah.
things you can say,
Yeah.
but you know how players are, they want to do things that they think should be possible, and you kind of have to
Yeah.
have a realistic reason for what it is that they're
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
'Cause very quickly they will say, "Yeah, but this, come on, this is sci-fi. Of
Mhm.
course, I have a blah blah."
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
where electromagnetic pulses come into play.
yeah, 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 yeah. I'm just glad I don't play with any engineers because they know too much.
Oh my
It's
gosh,
yeah,
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 yeah. I've got friends and folks who, are
mm,
connected to the company in various ways that I've certainly turned to and been like, "I made this up. Does this make any sense at all?" And they've
yeah,
looked at it and been like, "That's not how faster than light travel works."
yeah,
So so that can be challenging too as a creator.
yeah, yeah. Definitely. Okay. And so one thing that I noticed when I started to first read through the core book of Starfinder is there's lots of very interesting species that you can play,
Mm,
and some of them have, let's say the non, let's say they don't have the traditional gender divide that humans or other mammals would have, males and females. And at the time, I thought, well, okay, that might be a very conscious decision. So I'm curious, what was the idea behind that?
Yeah, so well, mostly it was because we wanted to really get away from the legacy of pigeonholing specific genders into
Hmm.
different types of roles. And one of the key examples of that was the Lashunta race, which is one of the core
Mm,
races in Starfinder. The
yeah.
original version of the Lashunta from Pathfinder, which was also taken from other, properties and things like that, had female Lashuntas being very tall and willowy and beautiful and with very pretty faces, and the males were short and squat and dwarf-like and strong, physically
Mm,
strong, whereas the females were more physically weak. And we really wanted to break away from that because we felt that that was a harmful trope that was permeating sci-fi that really expressed something that is no longer something that we really wanted to associate our brand with. We
yeah.
wanted there to be all possibilities for characters of all different genders and identities and things like that.
Mm,
So we thought long and hard exactly how we were going to change that. And our previous creative director, James Sutter, was involved, but primarily who was most involved was Crystal Frazier, who used to work at Paizo. And she really developed the divide that you see in Starfinder, which is that there are still the dimorphism, but it's not tied to gender, and it's something
mhm.
that is onset kind of at puberty, and a lot of it has to do with preferences of the character and individual, or like
Yeah,
like family resemblances or things like that. And so it really opens the door for the player to narratively say, I am this type of Lashunta and I'm
yeah,
good at that thing because it ties into who I am as a person, as
yeah,
opposed to biological sex.
yeah, 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 exactly. And I really liked that when I read that. I thought, wow, I wish maybe sometimes humans had that option to just say, hey, I've reached my teenage years. I think I prefer to be female or male or something else. And in this game, you can actually do that. So you are, in fact, the first female RPG hero on this show. Now, this is only episode, what is it, 12? Um,
Oh, cool.
yeah, yeah. But so it kind of struck me as weird that it took me 11 episodes before I got to an RPG hero that is not a guy.
That is
Uh,
true. There
yeah.
are more of us than there used to be, but
Mm,
it is certainly still a bit more male dominated.
Yeah, do you experience RPG land, let's call it that, as a male dominated kind of thing? Or?
I definitely notice it, and it was
Mm-hmm.
most prominent to me, I think, when I was younger,
Yeah.
and I was looking. It never really occurred to me that I could be a game designer or that I could be a creator, because when I was, a teenager and I was starting to play early D&D and the various different White Wolf games and lots of different systems, going to Gen Con early on,
Mm-hmm.
which for me was in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
But I think it just kind of just didn't register with me mentally that, I could be in this industry and I could make these games, and, I could have creative ideas that mattered and that were important to companies, and that became part of the community and industry as a whole. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that most, if not everybody that I was meeting at conventions and whose names were on the front of books were men, and were white men specifically. So
Yeah.
there's very much an unconscious kind of just assumption when you don't see people that reflect you in the industry that you're interested in, that does make it more difficult. And then of course there's always unconscious bias at play when you're trying to break in, and it's certainly a factor. So as much as I can, I very much try to encourage young women and create community with women who are creators. There's some wonderful women creators out there.
Definitely.
And and try to build that up and try to be a good example, but also create an environment in which everybody has opportunity and everybody feels that they're contributing, and that we're all just kind of supporting each other.
Yeah, but that's really great. Yeah, because I remember from starting to play Dungeons and Dragons. I was a teenager, and we had a group of guys, and we were playing, and it never really occurred to us to invite anybody else than other guys, which is kind of strange when you think about it. And now, yeah, the groups that I have two groups that I play with. One is still that old group from way back then. So nothing has changed there. But the other group, yeah, it's almost 50-50 men and women. I think normally during the day I'm a teacher, and I used to teach IT students, right?
Oh, okay.
150 guys and one girl. Can you imagine?
Yeah, and that's really hard. Like, I can't express how
Yeah.
difficult it can be to be the only woman in a room of 100 men.
Yeah, that's really tough. But also
Yeah.
for me as an educator, I found that it really hurts the dynamic in a group. And when there's a better mix, now where I teach at a different school, and it's pretty much 50-50, and the dynamic is so much better. You know, for one, the humor is a bit more polite, but but also just by looking at a problem from different angles, I think you can get much more done. Um, so it's good to see that it's improving. What can we and I mean we, our listeners and people that generally just play these games, what can we do to improve the this situation in role playing games?
Sure. So I think that exactly what you just alluded to is very
Mm,
important. When you're putting together your group and thinking about what you want to play, making sure that you're inviting women and men who are interested in the game,
yeah.
and that you're creating the types of relationships and friendships within the gaming community that really supports group play, and that network of friends, and reaching out to people who may or may not be interested, or asking your longtime players, hey, who else do you know? And just like
Mm,
making an effort to kind of get new blood into the group is very important, because like you said, at some point a lot of folks experience just the assumption that they're not interested in playing,
yeah.
or there's also concerns that are going on in the backs of the minds of folks who are sometimes invited into spaces in which there are little microaggressions and things that can turn them off of playing. So I think
Yeah.
just making an effort, and continuing that conversation and communication, and being very open about the fact that we want everybody to feel welcome, drawing that line between we want everyone to feel welcome and accidentally making someone feel like a unicorn. It can be
Yeah.
difficult,
Oh,
but
yeah. Like, oh, a woman?
yeah.
Yeah.
But that is my recommendation,
Yeah,
certainly.
definitely. Okay. And what would be a common microaggression that you've come across?
It's little things. It's often like being the only female player in a group of men and always getting asked to play the cleric, for
Ah,
example,
hmm,
or just jokes on at your character's expense that are sexist, or
hmm,
NPCs that are portrayed in a very caricature type of way. Those
yeah,
those type of things. We're
yeah,
all, if we're playing together, we're all friends, and
yeah,
certainly I would hope that there's an assumption that nobody's out to hurt somebody else, but
yeah,
just being open as a player when someone comes to you and says, hey, that really wasn't very cool, rather than
yeah.
getting defensive, actually listening to them can be a
Hmm.
huge step.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, good, excellent. Yeah, and I'm all for it. I think just like in the classroom, I think a gaming table is just more fun when there's different people of different backgrounds all around the table.
Yes, for
Um,
sure.
yeah, one of the things that I also wanted to talk about with you is this idea of a career in role playing games. Um, so let's maybe move on to that particular topic. So you mentioned also that you felt in the beginning that all these people who are creating cool stuff for role playing games are all guys, and now you look at you. You're the boss of them, which
It
is
is true, yeah, it
yeah.
is true. It's weird, the people that I have been the boss and manager of over the years.
I can imagine
But it's
that.
kind of
Yeah.
exciting, yeah.
Yeah, and so what's the what I see in your background is journalism, writing, etc. So this is I think a pretty good background to get into writing role playing games. Um, what sort of interesting, diverse backgrounds have you seen so far in your team? Are they all trained writers and journalists and those,
Oh,
or
no, and in
yeah.
fact, like, people ask me this question, and I like to say that I feel like having a writing background is extremely helpful in getting
Hmm,
into the RPG industry, but it is absolutely not required.
hmm.
I think I am the only person who comes from publishing that is in my immediate circle of folks that I work with on a
Oh.
regular basis. So I'm maybe forgetting someone, and if I do and they reach out to me, I'm sorry in advance. But on
Yeah.
my team, for example, I've got somebody with an archaeology degree.
Hmm.
I've got somebody who was an actor, an improv actor, and an acting background. Somebody who doesn't have a degree at all, but was into like computers and programming and things like that.
Yeah.
I have a former professor on my team.
Oh.
Yeah, and
Wow.
have with people just with myriad backgrounds.
Yeah.
Architecture is a background that's existed at Paizo. History degrees, cultural degrees, Asian studies. I'm just listing off the degrees of folks I know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's
Oh wow.
extremely, yeah, everybody kind of comes at it from a different background, and it's really that kind of love of the game. I think that propels you toward the career as opposed to
Yeah.
being able to study for it. Because there's not an RPG design degree for the
No.
most part. I mean, it's just not a thing that exists.
No, no, there are game design, but it's mostly it's aimed at computer games. Yeah,
Yes, yeah,
yeah,
which, some of the skills are
mm,
transferable. I have consulted as a professional on for some students who are involved in computer science, or not computer science, but computer game degrees at a
mm,
local university here in Seattle. But it is a very different technical skill set
yeah.
to work in video games than on RPGs.
I can totally imagine. Yeah, and so let's say that some of our listeners are thinking, "Oh, wow, I want to be doing this. I want to work on a game like Starfinder." So, what would you advise them to do? What's a good way to get yourself invited for an interview, or to at least to get noticed?
Sure. So I'd say the first thing is to know the system as well as you possibly can.
Hmm.
Certainly read the core rule book, play lots of games, play lots and lots of Starfinder, and I hope that that's exciting for some people to hear
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it really is professional development.
yeah.
Is the more that you can play, the more you realize how the rules work in practice, and the more experience you get with just sort of anticipating the chassis of the mechanics and how it can be applied in adventure situations.
Mm,
And just read all the material that exists, look at what's out there, and maybe in the back of your mind kind of come up with what design ideas you might have to get your juices sort of flowing. And
mm,
once you've decided that you want to be a freelance writer, the next step is to reach out to other publications. Third parties are a great way to get yourself started. There's a fan magazine for Paizo. Paizo doesn't publish it, but it's a fan magazine for Paizo called Wayfinder, which is a perfectly good way to get started. Being on forums and just kind of getting the lay of what exists out there is a good first step.
Yeah.
And then at some point, the next step is trying to approach maybe a Paizo developer or, you know, somebody who's adjacent to that type of position and saying, you know, I'm this person and I'm interested in writing, and having writing samples to show that are ideally things that have been published probably in third parties or, you know, in a fanzine or something, and being able to show, you know, what your work is the best way to get the attention of us to hire you for freelance assignments.
Yeah, so to have kind of a portfolio, if you're talking artistic senses. Yeah, okay. Oh, that sounds really good. And going to Gen Con, well, this year, sadly, I just heard that's not going to
Yeah,
happen. But
it's on.
oh,
Yep.
but yeah, so going to these conventions can actually help to get
Yes,
in
they
touch. Yeah,
certainly can. Yeah,
yeah,
getting face time with the developers, and you know, we're really, really busy at various conventions, but we also hang around a lot. You know, they're in hotels, and so we're kind of all over the place.
yeah,
We're at the booth. I think that's probably where a lot of people find a lot of success. I know that's certainly where I found a lot of success a long time ago.
yeah,
You know, just you know, making yourself known. Having business cards is a really impressive thing to us, because it, you know, it means you're taking it seriously, and it can be your
yeah,
business card from your day job, but as long as it's got your contact info on it.
yeah.
And then usually there's if you have a business card, we'll exchange cards with you,
Mhm.
and then emailing the developer you've met to follow up
Yeah,
and tell them, I'm this person, we met at this time in this place, we talked about this thing or
yeah.
something,
Mhm.
is also very important, because we meet so many people, we talk to so many people. It's not that we don't want to remember you, it's just we have
Yeah, yeah.
convention brain.
Yeah, yeah, because I can imagine that when you're at the booth and you meet all these people who are visiting the convention, a lot of them are going to have some kind of dream of, oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And we
and
love to talk to folks like that. We love to, you know, encourage people's passion. You know,
mm,
diversity is important to everybody at Paizo, and so we're always wanting to meet new folks, and we're always looking for new ways to reach out to different communities.
mm,
So, you know, the more that you can express, you know, your professional interest and be diligent kind of about it, then the better
yeah,
that it's going to be for your
right.
chances.
Okay. And what about us Europeans? Because yeah, Gen Con, etc., that's all in the United States.
Mhm.
Um, do you guys also visit conventions over here in Europe?
Yeah, there's some conventions that we do. So through Organized Play, there are a lot of international conventions.
Mm,
Usually, Tanya Waldridge, who's our Organized Play manager, will be probably the only employee to go if we've got an employee going, because of the
mhm.
just the international aspect. But
Yeah,
we also we've been going to UK Games Expo for the past 3 years in
right.
Birmingham, UK.
Mm,
So it's a smaller contingent, but we've
yeah,
been running a lot of demos, and there's been, you know, several staff folks who have been going to that. So that's an opportunity.
mm,
But, you know, also, like, we have email addresses and
yeah,
things that can be found on the website. The Starfinder team is listed on the
yeah,
website under Contact Us. So we understand that
yeah,
not everybody can afford to go to convention, and, you know, we don't want to
yeah,
accidentally gate lock folks out of it for that. So that's absolutely
yeah.
not the only venue.
No, no, no. Yeah, in fact, I got in touch with you through Twitter. So
Yeah, that's the thing,
yeah,
is a lot of us are just, we're out in public, and, you
yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah,
does not hurt to ask us things. So.
yeah. Exactly. Okay. And so, from what I see and read and hear from you, a lot of your focus has been on D20 based games, let's say.
Mhm.
Um, so, is it, you think, if somebody wants to work for Paizo, is it a good thing if they are mostly familiar with that, or do you actually prefer to get people in who played a wide variety of games?
It really depends on what the position is, but the biggest
Mm,
thing that's important for game side developers and designers is actual experience and deep knowledge of our system.
yeah.
So the most qualifying factor is going to be, how well do you know Starfinder, or how well do you know Pathfinder?
Yeah.
Um, Freelancing for us, honestly, the folks that we've hired in past years, and I've hired a lot of people in the past couple of years, like
Yeah.
6 or 7 total developers,
Wow.
have been folks who, you know, were very known to us because they had worked with us a lot, and, you know, we knew that they were very talented, and
Mm.
we had trusted them with big assignments in most cases.
Yeah.
So really that sort of knowledge and rapport with us as a company is the most important. It's a bonus if there are folks who have knowledge of other systems or who have designed for other systems or, have a lay of the land. That has definitely helped some of our folks kind of advance within their various, teams. But the most important thing is our system.
Yeah. And speaking of your system, so some people would describe Starfinder and Pathfinder as crunchy.
Yeah, I'd say that's accurate. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty crunchy. And so, what's to you? What's the appeal of a crunchy system?
I mean, I really like having rules to resolve specific things that players are doing. I don't know if you've ever like watched me on any streams or any kind of videos at events or anything like that, but I am a very performative sort of improv focused narrative driven GM,
Mm-hmm.
and I really encourage players to do things that are beyond just I'm gonna attack and they roll
Yeah.
a dice, I hit, I do this much damage. I really encourage them to describe what their character is doing.
Mm-hmm.
What are you trying to accomplish? How are you trying to accomplish it? What does it look like?
Yeah.
And really working that into the story that's being told. So that is very important to me, but I find that having rules that are behind that
Mm-hmm.
are it's both a fun challenge for me as a GM to figure out how I'm applying certain things, but also I feel like it kind of keeps things on the rails, because otherwise when I'm asking players to describe all these weird, crazy, exciting things that they're doing, it can be really easy to freeze up and think, oh, I don't know how they can do that.
Yeah.
So I really like having the background of the mechanics in my head for how that's moving forward.
Yeah. And so, how do you get the most out of a crunchy role-playing game? Because I find at my advanced age of 40 that that remembering all these rules when I don't play on a weekly basis, I see my friends, maybe the guys that I play Starfinder with, I see them maybe once every 1.5, 2 months. So
Mm-hmm.
in between sessions, there's a lot of time, and I tend to
Okay.
forget a lot of the details. So how do you get the most out of a crunchy game like Starfinder?
I think sometimes reviewing the rules that are going to be specific to that adventure, or making sure that you are really familiar with the mechanics behind your character class, and
Hmm.
just reviewing that before the session can be really helpful.
Yeah,
As a player, that's your question, right? As a player specifically.
yeah, or as a game master.
As a game master. Oh,
Yeah,
okay. Yeah, so I think, just kind of reviewing things that, are going to come up as a game master. For me, that's part of normal prep of just like,
yeah,
I know I've got these monsters or this trap, and let me make sure that, I refresh my mind on how this ability works,
yeah.
so that I can kind of mentally put together how this encounter is going to go.
Hmm.
But also, on streams, we don't do it because it really kills kind of the mood and the pacing and the cadence. But
Hmm.
in a game that might be just a home game or, a con game, if
Hmm.
there is something that's really complicated that a player is either wanting to do, or like a piece of equipment that they've gotten out of a book that's in the bowels of the library of the rules, it doesn't hurt
Hmm.
to just be like, I'm not sure, let me look it up, and
Yeah,
flip through and refresh yourself so that you can feel a little bit more confident about that call. So
yeah,
yeah, I think it's just kind of as a balance again between refreshing and prep, and
yeah.
just making calls about, is it better to look this up or is it better to just move forward?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Sometimes it's also okay to go like, well, I don't know the rules, so we're just going to say this happens, and
Oh yeah, I do that all the time on stream. Sometimes it's
yeah,
just like, I'm gonna say that that's an acrobatics check because it's a thing
yeah,
that isn't covered by the rules. So
yeah, yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. At some point, I had these radioactive monsters, and so there were a lot of rules kind of interacting with each other at some point. So they were dealing with radiation and
Mhm.
poison, but also explosion.
Oh yeah, the multiple different tracks of things that are
Yeah,
all being tracked separately. Yeah,
yeah,
that is challenging. I'm currently running a first edition Pathfinder campaign for some friends, and
Hmm.
every once in a while something comes up that's like, I don't remember how this works in first edition. And
Yeah,
luckily one of my players is like really still super into first edition, and so
ah,
will like private message me and be like, don't forget the poison damage.
yeah. Yeah.
But that's helpful.
Yeah, in our D&D game, we have a kind of a running gag that every time somebody tries to grapple someone, we're like, oh, let's get the book.
Oh, grappling, yeah. Is it 3.5 grappling?
Yeah, yeah,
Oh, yep. Okay, I get what you're
yeah.
saying. It's
Niche,
kind of a minefield.
yeah.
Yeah.
But in the end, we tend to get it. So crunchy rules, I guess, also require quite a lot of very meticulous editing. And so you got into the world of RPGs as an editor, right? Editor and writer, or
I actually it's kind of strange because it kind of all happened in very close proximity, but I actually started as a designer and freelance writer, and then
hmm.
I started getting into editing. So I did
Ah.
some shorter assignments for the Skull and Shackles Adventure Path, in fact.
Hmm.
And then I got involved with Cobalt Press and Wolfgang Bauer, who's a good friend of mine and has been for a long time,
Hmm.
and ended up doing editing projects that then pretty quickly escalated into being the lead developer and editor of first the 360-page Deep Magic for Pathfinder book, and
Ooh.
then a book of a similar size called Southlands,
Hmm.
and that I wrapped up. I think, yeah, I wrapped that up before I even got hired at Paizo full time. So I was
Wow.
kind of doing both of it
Uh-huh.
simultaneously.
Okay. And how is editing? So because editing means you read stuff with very different eyes, let's say, I think.
Yeah.
How has that affected the hobby for you? Because it's still also a hobby of yours, right? Playing these role playing
Oh yeah,
games.
yeah. I'm
Hmm.
in a bunch of games. I think I'm in 4 between things I run and things I play. I think I'm in 4
Wow.
campaigns currently.
Just
So
see this face, envy. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, they don't always go off every week
uh,
because, reasons, people
yeah.
being busy, but yeah.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
amazing. So has editing and working on role playing game materials, has that affected the hobby at all for you? The hobby aspect?
Not really. I mean, I think
Hmm.
if anything, it has given me ideas and fueled me wanting to play specific things and being interested in types of material that I might not have come across on my own, or if I did, I might not have realized that I was very personally interested in it.
Hmm.
So there's really a lot of exposure to what's out there in the publication world that you get when you're within the industry and you're
Hmm.
paying attention to what companies are doing because you're interested in it from the publication standpoint and from
Yeah.
the fan interest standpoint. But then there's also the personal, like, oh, that sounds really cool, I want to check out the Alien RPG from Modiphius,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
that sort of thing. So if anything, it has made me probably more of an RPG nerd.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's
Yeah.
excellent. That's good to hear. Because sometimes you see people, they become a professional at what they like and they kind of stop liking it because, well, now it's
Yeah,
work. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I can get that, but playing is very, very different from editing and developing
Hmm.
and writing. So I think maybe that's the difference, at least for me personally.
Yeah. Yeah. And you say, hey, you do these streams. So are those part of your job or just your hobby and you happen to film it?
So everything I've streamed so far has been through Paizo.
Hmm.
So I've done various one shots or small series for the Paizo Twitch channel.
Hmm.
I ran the beginner box. I've run a couple of other things. Oh, I think I've run some stuff at conventions as well. But currently, the stream that we have is through the Paizo Twitch channel that then is uploaded to YouTube, and it's called Starfinder Extreme. And it's about a very, very serious topic of indie wrestlers in the Pact world doing WWE style events and going on adventures as things inevitably blow up. And it's all about just goofiness and
Excellent.
the players doing crazy wrestling moves and like weird villains that are
Wow.
based on real world wrestlers, but don't tell anyone.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh.
No, people listen to this, it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Not that many.
I mean, it's super obvious because
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
that's part of the gimmick. So
Yeah.
I'm running the current arc, and there is actually it's called Starfinder Tag Team is the current arc, and
Hmm.
the PTs have to be in tag teams, and they're supposed to be participating in this tag team main event
Right.
along with wrestlers from a partner league, and the wrestlers are the Undersnaker and his sister Jane. So like it's really obvious who these wrestlers are.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that sounds amazing. That's really
it's
good.
it's not very serious.
No. Well, it doesn't always have to be, right? I mean,
No, and there's room in Starfinder for goofiness, and there was a couple of internal questions of just like, Starfinder is goofy and silly and funny, and I'm like, well, yeah, it can be. That's kind of the point of the rule set, is that,
yeah,
it is a lighter hearted version of a role playing game. You can play Guardians of the Galaxy, or
yeah,
a Space Quest or something else if you want to, but you can also play very serious storylines. We have a horror adventure path, for example, that works really well.
yeah.
So it's a very versatile rule set and
Yeah.
setting, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And some of the monsters, well, if you once you get into the alien archives,
Oh
oof.
yeah, we have some like, real messed up monsters.
Oh, sometimes I at the end of a session with my friends, they look at me like, "What is this twisted stuff?" I'm like, "Well, it's just
Starfinder.
it's aliens, man."
Just Starfinder. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Um, right. One thing that I ask every single one of my guests, which is a question that interests me personally, is this whole show is about role-playing game heroes. So somebody that you look up to, that you think, wow, they've their contribution to the game or to the hobby has been so interesting or so mind-blowing that I see them as a hero. So who would be your RPG hero?
Oh, that's a really cool question. So, one thing that I think is really fun and unique and, just fascinating about being in the RPG industry is that it truly is a business
Hmm.
in which your heroes become your peers. It's a small business, and it can be very grueling, it can be very demanding, it can be very difficult. But at the end of the day, if you're successful and you're able, to work alongside other professionals, you're going to be working with some of the biggest names in the business, and you're going to be meeting them, and you're going to be hanging out with them at conventions or becoming personal friends and going over to their house and playing games with them. And it's just really a fascinating, a very tight-knit community, and it's so great to be part of it.
Hmm.
It's every once in a while, and it just happened to be a lot early in my career when I was a freelancer before I worked for Paizo. I would check my my inbox, and I would have these lists of names of messages from folks, and just go, I can't believe that this is my life, because these are the
Yeah.
people whose names used to be on my D&D books when I was a kid.
Yeah.
so
Yeah, that's
so
really cool.
it's very cool. Yeah, it's very cool. And I think it's really important to just kind of remember, like, we might be professionals, but we're still people. We're still
Hmm.
just fans and friends and stuff. And so I really try not to think of myself as anything other than just somebody who's enjoying their job, and
Yeah.
happens to get paid for something that's fantastic and fun.
Yeah.
That doesn't answer your question, however. Which I'm happy to do.
Yeah.
There's a lot of folks that I looked up to and continue to look up to. I mentioned before earlier in this podcast, Crystal Frazier is someone who's been in the
Hmm.
business for a couple of decades. And when I was getting started as a freelancer, I really, just thought that she was amazing. Her adventures are so much fun. She really personified, or really gave a lot of personality to Paizo's goblins, for example, and the
Hmm.
various adventures involving them, and had put out just things that were fan favorites. And so I really kind of looked at her contributions and thought, if I can kind of ever get to where I feel like I'm at a similar level, I think that would be amazing. And then I ended up working with Crystal. She was actually hired in the same wave of developers as myself, in
Hmm.
Linda Zayas Palmer, who is now the organized play lead developer at Paizo.
Hmm. Wow.
That was very much an example of like, your heroes become your peers.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've looked up to many folks. Monty Cook is somebody that I really looked up to in the 3.5 days, and now Monty and Shauna, who are co-owners of Monty Cook Games, are friends of mine. And
Oh wow.
we've kind of really connected, and I'm a fan of the games that he puts out. I'm a fan of their company.
Hmm.
And so he's another example. Wes Schneider, who was one of the first people that I met in the business, actually really the first person I met in the business, who used to be the editor-in-chief at Paizo,
Hmm.
is one of my best friends in the world. He and his husband are, really, really close with me. And,
Yeah.
he and I really worked very closely, because he created Hell Knights, and he wrote 7 Days to the Grave, and he wrote all of this really fascinating dark fantasy stuff that I really love. And when he left Paizo, he handed the keys to hell literally over to me and said, "You've done all of this work, writing this material. You are now the keeper of this lore." And so, yeah, there are lots of folks, not just those three, but
yeah, of course. And I think that's what makes this question difficult sometimes, is that especially when you're in the industry, you could probably spend the rest of the hour talking about all these different folks.
Yeah, I have like Wolfgang, I really need to mention, James Jacobs, who's also a good friend of mine and is in my personal campaign, and actually I'm in his, and I think we're playing tonight.
All right.
So yeah, so lots of different wonderful folks.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you so much for your contribution to my little show and my tiny little corner of RPG land.
No problem. I'm just happy that you were interested.
Yeah, excellent. And I hope that some of the people listening are now emboldened to pursue a career in this wonderful world. So, another RPG hero interviewed and lots of things learned. And this time we got inspiration not just for gaming, but even for our career. Thank you so much, Amanda. So science fantasy, my main takeaway is that it's important to research your sources of inspiration, especially if you're playing or running this type of game for the first time, or if you find you're having trouble coming up with really cool things to do in the game. Another thing to keep in mind is how do magic and science or tech interact with each other in your game. That can create some really interesting and novel ideas. Traditional limitations that you get in fantasy games often don't exist or are easy to overcome in science fantasy. So, as a game master, make sure you anticipate this. And one thing that I found interesting is you could use the internet or the infosphere or whatever the game calls it to your benefit. So some game masters might feel, oh no, my players can look up anything they want, so they're unlimited. They have unlimited resources. But actually, you could have them find an article that has some adventure hooks in them, and then that can spur on extra adventure, etc. So that's a wonderful thing. And also, of course, if they can find stuff, well, so can their enemies. That's not a bad idea in itself. And when it comes to crunchy games, well, basically crunch is just rules that help you resolve specific situations in a specific way, so that you're not just constantly saying, well, I guess I'll shoot, oh, I hit. And then when it comes to a career, simply be a fan of the game that you want to work for. Be bold, just go for it. Start small, perhaps maybe some freelance articles, etc. in a fan magazine, and build your way up. And of course, very importantly, in any career, build up your network. Get really connected to people. And apparently conventions are a great way to do that. So let's hope that next year all the conventions are back up and running. And then the interesting effect of having a career in RPGs is that your RPG heroes will actually become your peers. And, you might show up in my show one day. Wouldn't that be cool? Food for thought, at any rate. Well, that's it for episode 12. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed recording. If you did, please consider leaving a 5-star review on iTunes. It really helps to get the podcast get heard. Want to keep up with the latest news about my podcast? Well, hop on over to Twitter at RPGHeroes1. Check out the full show notes with all the links, etc. at rpgheroes.buzzsprout.com. Want to support the show and join other supporters on my Discord channel? Then I would be honored if you check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/rpgheroes. You can also buy RPG products with my affiliate code. Check the show notes. 2 weeks from now, I'll be talking to Kelsey Dion from the Arcane Library about adventure design and minimalism in RPGs. Until next time, stay heroic.